事務局よりご連絡いたします。
This is a housekeeping announcement. Those of you who are participating from part 2, there are housekeeping announcements. When part 2 starts, you will be able to raise questions through the Q&A function of the Zoom. On your device, on the control panel, there will be questions button, so if you could please send your questions. And your questions for part 2 needs to be sent until the question time is over. And we would like to entertain as many questions as possible, but it will be within the scope of time allotted. And today we have simultaneous interpretation service available between Japanese and the English languages. Those of you who are using the Zoom application, you will be able to utilize the interpretation function. If you would click on the globe logo, you will be able to choose the language. You will be able to change the language in between as well. After the forum has ended, we will send you email to kindly ask to fill in the questionnaire. We would like to utilize your opinions for future usage. Please wait until part 2 actually starts.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Japan CCS Forum, Japan Asia CCS Forum 2021. I am Hiroshi Nambo, Japan representative of Global CCS Institute. Previously, during part 1, we have learned and discussed CCS policy, technology, and R&D in Japan, as well as Japanese initiative in Asia through the Asia CCUS network. It was a great session, and we have learned a lot from all the panelists and Q&A session. So big thanks to Japan CCS company to organize such a wonderful part 1. Now we will start part 2. Global CCS Institute organized this part 2 and focus on lesson learned and discuss from ongoing CCS project in Europe and Asia. We invite 3 speakers from Europe and 4 from Asia. And we look forward to active and fruitful discussion again during part 2. Okay, now I would like to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Sumie Nakayama, Board Director of Global CCS Institute. She will lead this session and facilitate Q&A session. So, Dr. Nakayama, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Hiroshi-san. Okay, then I'd like to start part 2. This part consists of 2 divisions. So first one, we have 3 speakers from European project of CCUS. And in the second division, we'll have 4 speakers speaking about Asia Pacific CCUS project and research. And in between, we'll have a Q&A session. So I'd like to introduce first speaker, Jonathan Carpenter. He is serving for Petrofac, and he is the Vice President, New Energy Services. Jonathan, floor is yours.
Thank you much for this opportunity to speak today. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen now?
Yes, clearly.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm here to talk today a little bit about the acorn project up in the northeast of Scotland in the UK. First, just a quick introduction to Petrofac, the company I work for. So Petrofac is an engineering contractor. We've been going 40 years now and have 31 offices worldwide. We're particularly known for our engineering and construction capability, particularly in the Middle East, North Africa, the CIS and Asia, as well as our operations and maintenance capability worldwide, but particularly in Europe. We have over 9,000 employees around the world, and on any given year, we do about $2 billion of procurement, over $200 million of construction man hours, and 4.5 million annual engineering man hours. And Petrofac's offering covers the full life cycle of energy infrastructure assets. So we design, build, operate, maintain, and train and manage the competence of the people that actually deliver these projects. And Petrofac as a company has committed to being a net zero company.
Excuse me, Mr. Carpenter? Yes. It looks like we are seeing your presenters the material with your notes. So could you change it to the same? Please to get the display setting. Yes, the right side. Oh no, it's a top. There, can you see the display settings? Is up top line.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, not a problem. Sorry, I'm used to using Teams and not Zoom. So that's a little bit of Petrofac, as you said. We're committed to being a net zero by 2030. So just in terms of our focus within new energy services, which is the part of the business that I look after. So we started this up just over a year ago to give us an explicit focus on opportunities in the low carbon and renewables space. Within that, we're focused on 5 areas. Obviously, carbon capture and storage is a particularly big one, but we're also focused on hydrogen, offshore wind, waste to value, and emissions reduction. And recently, within the kind of carbon capture and space, and I'll talk a little bit about our role in the acorn project in a second, but we're doing a post-combustion carbon capture project in Stockholm for Stockholm Exergi, looking at capturing emissions off the back of a 375 megawatt CHP biomass power plant, so that will be a BECCS project. Historically, we've done some work for Shell, both on the Peterhead project in its first incarnation, and also looking at the Captain Clean, which is carbon capture on the back of the coal-fired power station down in Grangemouth. And then most recently, with the acorn project, which we'll talk through now, we are the project management office and owner's engineer for Storego, looking after the whole project. We're doing the feed around the subsea and pipeline package. We're doing the concept and currently doing the pre-feed and the direct air capture project as part of that cluster. And we've also done some of the concept work around the CO2 import terminal up in Peterhead. So a little bit around the acorn project and where it's got to. And obviously there was quite a large update yesterday morning from the UK government, which announced acorn as the reserve cluster in the CCS competition that's just been announced. So just by way of update, so that means the East Coast cluster and the HyNet cluster, and I think Martin Curry is going to speak about HyNet shortly, are the ones that have got the kind of the track 1 status, and acorn is in reserve. What that still means, though, is acorn can still access some of the incentive mechanisms, so the carbon capture CFD, contract for difference mechanism, as well as the regulated asset base support mechanism to support the infrastructure build out. It just probably doesn't get access, at least initially, in the £1 billion capital funding pot that's available to the 2 track 1 clusters initially. There will be a subsequent process. So the UK government is committed to having 4 CCUS clusters up and running by 2030. I think the 10 million ton target that they'd set out initially will be more than blown away by those first 2 clusters, and certainly with acorn on top, I think we could be aiming for more than 30 million tons of emissions capture in the UK by 2030 at this rate. But this is something that I think the acorn cluster will be focused on continuing in this process. So just a little bit around kind of what this project is. So acorn is a phased development primarily based around the GUNDIH field and the reuse of existing oil and gas infrastructure so the GUNDIH pipeline and the St Fergus gas terminal up in the northeast of Scotland. The project's led by Storegga, so they're an independent carbon management company. It's a bunch of kind of oil executives who've seen the opportunity in the CO2 space to reuse their capability and skills to develop projects and build a business in this space. And they're partnered with Shell and Harbour Energy to develop this project. And there's a range of other participants, so NSMP as one of the major operators of the St Fergus terminal up there as well. And the interesting thing about acorn, obviously, because of the reuse of the infrastructure, it's actually a very economic project to develop. And also it's phased. So there's emissions kind of on the doorstep in St Fergus and that form part of the kind of the phase 1 facility. So about 340,000 tons. And that by doing that process, they're able to then unlock the infrastructure, start using the pipeline and storing the CO2 offshore in GUNDIH. And there's about 150 million tons in that initial GUNDIH field. And then the project then is aiming to expand and take on then a number of other emission sources. So looking around the immediate area, there is the SSE Thermal and Equinor Peterhead Power Project, which is just down the road from St Fergus. So that will be a power plant with carbon capture on the back. That's about another 1.5 million tons of emission that will be plugged in. There's then also, I think very excitingly, the Peterhead Port. So this is an existing deep water port just down the road from St Fergus with an existing pipeline connection up to St Fergus. And that's going to be redeveloped as a CO2 import terminal. And you may have seen recently that Uniper and Shell have already announced they've signed an MOU with Acorn to transport their CO2 from a power plant development on the Isle of Grain, just outside London, which we then shipped up to Peterhead as one of its anchor customers. And then more broadly, there's also then a pipeline that runs from St Fergus down to what we call the Scottish Central Belt. And there's a very big cluster of emissions around Grangemouth, where Ineos, ExxonMobil and Shell have a number of refining and petrochemical facilities. And the idea being that the Acorn project will capture and facilitate the storage of the emissions from the wider kind of area of Scotland, transport them up to St Fergus and then offshore. Interestingly, at St Fergus, obviously there's the GUNDIH pipeline, which is the first one to go. Then there are 2 other pipelines from St Fergus connecting to other areas of the GUNDIH field, but then also out to the East May field. So the Miller Gas pipeline and the Atlantic pipeline. And within 50 kilometers of that kind of those pipeline corridors, there are, I think it's over 3 gigatons of potential storage sites that can be accessed. So this is a huge potential carbon capture project, one that will hopefully enable Scotland to meet its target of being net zero by 2045 and actually provide the UK an export capability actually somewhere where other emitters, both from the UK and Europe, can send their CO2 and have it stored. As part of the project, there's also a hydrogen side as well. So obviously there's a very large volume of natural gas coming into St Fergus. And so there's plans for a 3-phase blue hydrogen project that will take initially 200 megawatts of hydrogen production and then 2 subsequent phases of 300 megawatts. Convert the natural gas to hydrogen at St Fergus and obviously take the CO2 away and store it in the Acorn fields or the East May fields, and then transport that hydrogen down to industrial users, both in Aberdeen, but also in the wider Scotland, again, probably reusing the existing national transmission system to help decarbonise the heating system in the UK. And that's just a little bit around the impact of the hydrogen side. And then finally, and certainly for me, most excitingly, there's also plans for a direct air capture project, which I mentioned before. So this is using Carbon Engineering's direct air capture technology, looking at doing the first direct air capture plant in Europe, which would then connect into the Acorn infrastructure. So this would take CO2 from the atmosphere at whatever is 440 parts per million, condense it, and then export it via the Acorn infrastructure. So we're currently doing the pre-feed on that project at the moment as Petrofac, with obviously Carbon Engineering as the technology partner, and then looking to ideally get that project delivered and capturing CO2 by 2026. That's the first of what will hopefully then be a number of direct air capture plants in the UK. And that project has also got some funding from the UK government, Project Dreamcatcher, which is also looking at improving the capture process and actually switching the fueling of that from natural gas to either hydrogen or electric fuel such that it's an even lower carbon process to be delivered. And obviously using direct air capture obviously creates negative emissions, taking CO2 out of the biosphere and putting it back under the ground. And certainly, if we want to get to net zero by 2050, the projections that we're seeing would suggest that we're going to need a very large proportion of these greenhouse gas removal technologies. So it's very exciting that the UK government actually yesterday committed to having 5 million tons of greenhouse gas removal in the UK by 2030 as well, of which this would obviously be quite a significant part. So that I'll pause there. I think that's the end of my 10 minutes. So thank you very much for the opportunity and look forward to questions in a minute.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, then I'd like to invite next speaker. She is Ragni Luitwaite. I'm very sorry for my bad pronunciation, but she is serving Northern Lights, and she is business development advisor. Ragni, the floor is yours.
Hi, and thank you for that introduction, and I apologize for my very inconvenient name. It's strange even even for Norway. Let me just say that. So hopefully you can all now hear me and see my screen. As mentioned, perfect. As mentioned in the introduction, my name is Ragne, working for the Northern Lights joint venture, which I will give you a brief introduction to. So the Northern Lights, what started as a project was got the final investment decision a year and a half ago. So this has already been in the works for a considerable amount of time. So since getting that final investment decision, we have actually started construction of this CCS value chain. So what you see in the picture on the bottom right is actually our rock blasting from where we are going to be putting our intermediate storage and CO2 carrier jetty receiving facilities, and also where the pumping station is going to be, etc., for where the pipeline will be going offshore 100 kilometers and then into the reservoir. So in June this year, 2021, the project was officially moved forward to establish a joint venture company, which is where I'm currently seconded into. We are not huge, but we are owned by 3 oil and gas majors. So it's Shell, Equinor, and Total Energies, who are equal owners in the Northern Lights joint venture. So we have considerable backing from our owners and competence from them, and the work is spread out. In order to be able to execute on the Northern Lights project as well as the Longship project, which I will mention later, we've had considerable funding from the Norwegian state, which has been absolutely monumental. So I'll come back to that later. So as probably everyone on this call is aware, the CCS value chain starts with the CO2 capture. In our case, we are operating with liquefied CO2. So the captured CO2 then needs to be purified and liquefied before it's then loaded onto the vessel. And this is where the Northern Lights scope starts. So we are a transport and storage company. We do not take responsibility for the capture part, and we require the liquefied CO2 to be at a given spec before we can take it onto our vessels. At the ship flange is where we start taking responsibility for the CO2. The liquid CO2 is then transported via a vessel into our facilities, which I showed on the previous slide, which we're currently building on the west coast of Norway, where it's then injected into the pipeline and then into the saline aquifer that we have identified as our storage license. For the Northern Lights project, we are currently FID'd for phase 1. So that's what you see on kind of the y-axis here. It's 1.5 million tons per year. Out of those 1.5 million tons per year, the government has reserved capacity for 2 times 0.4. So that's 2 projects of 400,000 tons per year has been reserved by the Norwegian state as part of the overall state support agreement. which means we are now currently commercially selling the remaining capacity of the first phase, 0.7 million tons per year. And that's currently where we're at. So we're trying to build a market to have customers actually wanting to tap into this value chain that we are providing. So for the first phase, we're building one ship for each of these two already determined projects, and then with securing the remaining of the capacity for phase one, we'll build additional ships. So last week we announced the shipbuilding contract, which will be in Asia, because that is something we would love to be able to do in Norway, but we are not. So that needs to be put out to the proper expertise. I'll come back to the vessels in a minute. The onshore facilities are dimensioned for the 0.5 million tons as well. However, the pipeline has been mentioned for what we'll talk about as phase two. So phase two is going all the way to 5 million tons, and because the pipeline would be a huge investment to do twice, that has already been taken in the first phase. So the pipeline capacity is oversupplied for the first phase, but we are hoping and anticipating that we will be expanding to a phase two and 5 million tons. For the first phase, we are doing one injection well and also one contingency well to ensure a steady flow and backup solution. And if we were to expand to phase two, we would need to add additional wells to that. We also have umbilicals and some support linked into existing offshore infrastructure. And as you see on the far right, the economics of this comes into part funding from the Norwegian state and from the owners. And going forward, this needs to be fully commercial and a self-standing business case for us to move forward. So that's what's contingent before we can actually move forward to FID. Also, the phase two is to ensure that there is a market for this. So I have a naval architecture background. So personally, I think the ships are a very fascinating part, and they're a very important part of why this is new. Because as we've heard today and previously, CCS as a concept is not new, and I'll come back to that. However, the ships are unlocking a new possibility here. So the vessels are not the biggest tankers. They are similar in size and spec as an LPG coaster. They're 7,500 cubic meters and medium pressure. So that means the 13 to 14 bar and approximately minus 26 degrees. So that is what we require the CO2 to be delivered at, the conditions we want them delivered at. So we're evaluating future sizes for the vessels. However, what we see is that this needs to make sense with the customers as well. It can't just be maximizing the ships for the ship OPEX purpose alone. It needs to also match up with the cargo loadings from the customers and the price of the intermediate storage for the customers as well. Obviously, we would want the vessels to be as fuel efficient and low emission as possible. We are then building the first two running on LNG, which reduces some of the emissions compared to conventional diesel fueled engines. We're also going to be having air lubrication underneath the hull to reduce the friction and reduce the fuel consumption, as well as rotor sail in front and shore power when inshore, at least on the Norwegian sites, reducing noise, etc., as well as emissions, obviously. So coming back to my original point, CCS is not new as a concept. However, what is new is the flexible and the open source value chain that we're building. So where traditional oil and gas industry would be the only ones who had access to the reservoirs and subsequently were able to actually do carbon storage, we are now, by opening this with this shipping solution, we're opening the CCS value chain to third-party emitters who have absolutely nothing to do with either liquid gas transportation or subsea reservoirs. And that's really where Northern Lights is trying to expand boundaries of the world. And we see this as important because this just to illustrate kind of the market potential. If you only have oil and gas as the potential capturers and storers of CO2, you've got 135 facilities, approximately 150 million tons per year, whereas if you introduce the vessels and open up the value chain, we see that the potential is enormous. So we're getting to over 2,000 facilities and almost 1.7 thousand million tons per year. So the market is drastically increasing by introducing this shipping solution, which is really what Northern Lights is trying to uncover. For CCS in Europe in general, going forward, we see this as a huge industry, hopefully introducing both new countries, new industries, tapping into this potential. We hope the logistics will be organized through a multitude of modes, everything from hubs, intermediate storage, large vessels, small vessels, pipelines, trains, everything that it takes to kind of build this together and get it as a functional commodity infrastructure. We're hoping that we see multiple storage providers. So basically we are inviting competition to the table and hope everyone or as many as possible will follow, because this will ensure reciprocity. It will be a more robust industry. We would be able to develop standardization, reduce costs, and increase the learning across. So we're hoping to see as many competitors as possible. This is completely necessary for CCS to be successful. It won't be living on Northern Lights alone. The primary markets that we're aiming for is obviously the hard-to-abate industry. That's where we see the need for CCS will be for a long time, as well as the new industry that will be enabled by CCS, especially then blue hydrogen, but also bio and direct air capture, as mentioned as from the previous speaker as well. So just to kind of bring in the government project here a little bit, as you see on the illustration, Northern Lights is the transport and storage provider, whereas what the Norwegian state has called Longship is the entire value chain. So that includes the capture part as well for those two capture sites that I mentioned. So that's one cement factory, it's called Nosem, it's owned by Heidelberg. And then it's Fortum Oslo Varme Waste to Energy. And Fortum is only partially financed, so they are now looking for the final funding to be able to go forward with this project. But in total, Longship is the Norwegian government's demonstration of a full-scale CCS value chain. And what the Norwegian state did here was actually ensure that the final investment decision be taken throughout the value chain at the same time, because this would be locked in a chicken and egg situation for a long time. And do you start capturing before you have storage, or do you start storing before you have anything that's captured? So this unlocks that. Means we could get going, but it also meant that we built double the capacity that what the government required, and then we could start commercially going to the market. So what we're hoping we've done here is get the snowball to start rolling and get CCS to start being a potential actually commercially available product in the Northwest European market. We get support for the CAPEX and OPEX for the first 10 years and only the first phase. So this is the support we get from the state is really the kickstart, where we hope that it will then start rolling. I believe that was my final slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ragni. Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, so I'd like to invite the next speaker from UK, Martin Curry. He is a senior commercial negotiator in UK. Martin, thank you very much for your presentation. So we have received many questions, and so first I'd like to ask this question. Ragni, could you please share the CO2 standard spec for Northern Lights to transport and storage, like a CO2 concentration or a prohibited impurity material?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. It's one that's high on the agenda. We have a specific Northern Lights CO2 spec, but it's a table, so it's hard for me to reiterate it here. But I'm happy to share that after. I figured the level of detail would be too high, but this is something that we are extensively going through because it is important for the capture to find an appropriate level of purification because this is an expensive process. And we then see that obviously we need to make sure that the CO2 spec fits. However, we also see that it needs to be safe, and that's the primary goal. And obviously the CO2 will be commingled in our intermediate storage when it comes into our storage tanks on the west coast of Norway, and also in the pipeline and also in the reservoir. So we need to make sure that even though the CO2 streams standalone are safe, they also need to be able to be mixed in a safe manner. So a lot of work is going into ensuring a CO2 spec which makes sense both for the market and for attaining the integrity and the safety.
Thank you very much. So that specification table is, say, published, made published, publicly available at the website?
It is a lot of information about, because this is a state-funded project, a lot of the information can be found on, I think it's ccsnorway.com or something similar. I'll make sure to share with the organizers after, where there are a lot of reports on actually all of the work that's been going in advance to this, and it also includes the table for the CO2 spec, but I'll make sure to share. So thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is also to Ragni. And what is the component of revenue of the project in commercial phase? Will plant owners emitting CO2 pay fees to Northern Light?
Yeah, I think this is where it gets really interesting, because this is where the industry has never really gotten to, right? This is the commercialization of it. And this is what we're trying to negotiate with commercial customers right now. What will this look like? And I think it's safe to say it's going to be a tariff structure where you have a price per CO2 stored in some shape or form, and exactly how that looks, if that's indexed towards everything. And that's the kind of stuff that we are negotiating now, trying to understand. And that's where you see obviously the well-established commodities of LNG and crude oil. They all have their standards. You have the Brent, everything you rely on, you know exactly how it should be delivered and what the quality needs to be. And this is where we need to get with CO2, and we need to understand how this industry will be moving forward. So it's challenging to get those first contracts because there's so much uncertainty, but we're trying to figure this out. But some sort of price per stored CO2 is probably where we're going to be heading.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, actually, I have many questions to Ragni. Yeah, please don't mind, gentlemen. But I will pick some questions to gentlemen. Question to Martin-san in Eni. Would you mind if I ask you why do you expect CO2 comes from ATR? Combined reformer is not considered. Combined reformer is applied based on some technologies to produce low carbon hydrogen. Can you take it, Martin?
I'm not an expert on particularly on hydrogen production. We focus very much on the transportation storage of the CO2. But the technology that I mentioned is the technology that will be adapted by our hydrogen developers, which is SR Oil and Progressive Energy, who are utilizing a capture technique developed by Johnson Matthey. And essentially this is focusing on absolute low carbon hydrogen production, which is a great point of interest worldwide. And all I can say is that the technology that's being applied is absolutely low carbon. I can't quote exactly the numbers of related to that, but yeah, I think if you go to the HyNet website, you will be able to get more details of the technology being applied for the hydrogen production.
Okay, thank you very much. So I now have questions to all speakers. In CCS project session, I really hope the CCS hub project in EU goes successfully. Large-scale CCS hub is so important to optimize the CCS cost. However, could you tell us how many years of CO2 storage potential has been identified so far for each project? From Jonathan?
As I was saying in our presentation, the initial GUNDIH store is about 150 million tons. And when you go out to East May, that goes up to about 2 to 3 gigatons. The 3 initial pipelines that we identified have about 20 million tons a year of throughput capacity. So yeah, you can do the math. It's a very long time of potential storage capacity up in Scotland.
Thank you. How about
And
you,
from my point of view, regarding the HyNet project and the use of the Liverpool Bay fields, as I mentioned, the storage capacity of the 3 fields that I mentioned is 200 million tons. We foresee a life of 25 years based upon the current maximum design capacity for storage at about 10 million tons per year. But we will be ramping up to that figure. So we think the asset has an operational life of 25 years.
Thank you.
And we have expansion options, as I mentioned, that could include further CO2 storage opportunities in the East Irish Sea. There are other depleted, much larger gas fields out there to the north. So there's expansion options.
Thank you very much. How about Northern Light?
I think from our side as well, we're very secure that we have the sufficient capacity for at least the initial 2 phases, and then building forward, we'll need to see how big it's going to be and what will be the most effective way of actually doing CCS, and if we need to figure out other ways to optimize. And I think for the Norwegian continental shelf in general, there's considerable storage potential, which we'll be able to tap into both as Northern Lights and as other CCS operators. And it's going to be interesting to see how the government going forward would kind of be awarding licenses, etc., for CCS, and if that's going to be relying on kind of oil and gas experience, or if we'll find other ways to develop the CCS storage potential.
Thank you very much. We still have many questions, but we have a time restriction, so let me allow to proceed to next part. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you very much. So I now would like to invite next speaker, Christian Winterfield. He will speak about Timor Leste / Northern Australia CCS Hub. Christian, floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen here. If you bear with me for a moment.
Okay, it's perfect. Not perfect. Something's wrong. Okay, good. Thank you.
So thank you very much to the Global CCS Institute and Japan CCS Co for inviting me to speak to this event today, and hello from Adelaide, Australia. I will be talking today about the Timor Leste North Australia CCS Hub project that Santos has. I'm getting a little bit of feedback there, so I might just headset here. Is that better? Hopefully that. But first, I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of Santos and one of our other projects. And Santos is a leading supplier of natural gas in Australia and Asia as a fuel for providing cleaner energy. We're Australia's biggest gas supplier, domestic gas supplier, and aim to be a leading Asia Pacific LNG supplier. Santos is committed to reducing our emissions to achieve net zero scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2040. And critical to our pathway to net zero emissions will be the successful rollout of our CCS strategy. The first of our CCS projects is at Moomba in the South Australian outback, almost in the middle of our continent. And our Moomba CCS project will safely and permanently store around 1.7 million tonnes per annum of carbon dioxide in the same reservoirs that have held oil and gas in place for tens of millions of years. We're expecting to take a final investment decision on this project by the end of the year. All of our technical and commercial milestones have been achieved, and the only thing we're waiting for is the project to finalise its registration for Australian carbon credit units. So further to this opportunity, we have significant potential in Timor, Leste and Northern Australia to repurpose the Bayu-Undan gas field as a CCS hub for the region. And you know, as a forum today for Japan and Asia, I've decided to focus on this opportunity and also acknowledge our Japanese partners in our Northern Australia projects in INPEX, Jura and Tokyo Gas. So the commercial aspects of CCS projects are significantly enhanced through achieving scale. And I note that the last handful of presentations have all been discussing CCS hubs, and the global CCS industry focus has definitely shifted over recent years from individual projects to storage hubs and clusters. The Bayu-Undan project seeks to establish a CO2 storage hub in Darwin, Northern Australia, and the foundation of this hub will be the capture of emissions from the Barossa gas development, which took final investment decision earlier this year and is anticipated to be online in 2025, and also emissions from the Darwin LNG facility. There are also potential future expansion opportunities for additional LNG processing trains at the Darwin LNG facility from fields such as Evans Shoal, which is run by E&I. To achieve economies of scale and drive down unit costs for transmission and storage, there is opportunity to aggregate other emitters in the region from both natural gas processing facilities and also other industrial sources. This includes neighbouring LNG facilities, future offshore gas development, and even future clean energy projects such as emissions associated with hydrogen and ammonia production from natural gas. All of this is enabled through the use of the Timor-Leste Bayu-Undan gas field for permanent storage of this captured CO2. And you know, these are the same reservoirs that have historically contained and produced natural gas over the past 15 years. So in order to achieve the CCS hub vision, the foundation project requires some new facilities at Darwin. These include additional CO2 processing capacity, in addition to CO2 dehydration and compression facilities to deliver relatively pure CO2 at pressure to the pipeline. All other facilities required for the project can be repurposed from existing offshore gas production facilities. The gas export pipeline that has transported natural gas from the Bayu-Undan offshore facility around 500 kilometres to Darwin LNG can be repurposed as a CO2 transmission pipeline operating in the other direction. And offshore in Timor-Leste waters, there are platform facilities that can be modified and repurposed for CO2 injection.
and natural gas production and injection wells that can be repurposed for CO2 injection and monitoring. As a depleted hydrocarbon reservoir, the Bayu-Undan field is an ideal target for safe and permanent storage of CO2. The exploration, appraisal and development history of the field provides us with significant amounts of data to characterise and model the CO2 injection target. Each well that's been drilled provides information on the nature of the reservoir and its properties, and substantial rock core samples are available for further analysis. The extensive pressure and production data has been used to perform a history match simulation of the reservoir performance under production as a basis for modelling future performance of CO2 injection. In essence, we know how much the reservoir has produced, which gives us much greater confidence in the capacity of the reservoir for CO2. In addition, a strong and laterally extensive aquifer acts as a pressure sink for injected CO2. The ability to inject CO2 into the reservoir is well understood through periods of natural gas re-injection. At peak operations of the field, around 1 billion cubic feet of gas per day was being injected to enhance recovery of gas condensate from the field. And this historic operation provides a good example of future performance as a CO2 injecting target. And most importantly, the historic containment of hydrocarbon gas for tens of millions of years gives us really good confidence in the natural geology providing a seal for the safe and permanent storage of CO2. So the combination of well understood reservoirs and established equipment that can be repurposed for CO2 service make the Bayu-Undan CCS project a particularly attractive opportunity for development. Potential sources for over 12 million tonnes per year of CO2 have been identified that may be captured at a Darwin low emissions hub. Based on assessed pipeline capacity, over 10 million tonnes per year of these emissions could ultimately be stored in Bayu-Undan with sufficient capacity to sustain injection for over 200 years. Considering the available reservoir knowledge and opportunity to repurpose existing facilities, this project can be delivered much quicker than new greenfield projects. Bayu-Undan CCS potentially provides the solution for Barossa reservoir emissions from project startup and opens up other resource opportunities in Northern Australia. The potential scale of this project would put Bayu-Undan CCS at the forefront of global large-scale projects and position Timor-Leste as a significant global player in carbon capture and storage. We are early on this journey, presently working through our pre-FEED studies, but I look forward to providing future updates as we progress this exciting opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, let me invite next speaker. He is Dr. Muhammad Sule. He has many titles: Manager of National Center of Excellence for CCUS, Manager of Center for CO2 and Flare Gas Utilization, Institute of Technology, Bandung. Dr. Rahmat, could you please take the floor?
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity. Wait a minute. Could you see the slide already?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I would like now to present the latest updates of the planned CCUS implementation in Indonesia. I would like to start my presentation with the roadmap of oil and gas production in Indonesia. It is planned that in 2030, we could increase our oil production about 800,000 barrels per day. And it could be increased even up to 1 million barrel per year. If enhanced oil recovery is introduced. If we take a look to the right figure, we could see that actually the unrecoverable reserve in Indonesia is still huge. It's about 63%. That's why we believe that EOR is one of the solutions to maintain our oil production. Last year, our Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources said that CCUS in Indonesia is promoted because it is a key issue at the global level relating to the reduction of CO2 emission, and we use the same to increase oil recovery in depleted oil fields. So that's why our government welcome all parties to join in the developing of CCUS in order to achieve the commitment to sustainable energy. Besides that, the government is currently finalizing the presidential decree of carbon pricing, and we hope that this regulation will be already valid in a short time. Actually, the CCUS activity in Indonesia has been started since 2012 when several researchers from ITB worked together with Pertamina and also DG Oil and Gas in order to make use the CO2 from central processing plant of GUNDIH area. So in the upper part of the slide, you could see that there are 3 structures that produce gas inside the GUNDIH field. This is called Kedung Tuban, this is Randu Belatung, and Kedung Lusi, and it produces about 800 ton of CO2, 800 ton per day of CO2. And if we could inject the CO2 back to the Kedung Tuban structure, and within 10 years, there will be about 3 million tons of CO2 will be stored. And as the byproduct, there will be incremental gas production of about 36 billion standard cubic feet, which will be equivalent with about 100 million US dollar. So we could see here that the injection after 15 years, so the breakthrough will happen. But here we could see that the incremental gas production of about 5.4% will occur. We have calculated also the capex for this CCUS project, and it's about 49 million, and the total opex is about 20 million for 10 years. But then we are very happy to receive an offer from Japanese government to implement a so-called joint crediting mechanism scheme. Last year, a consultant appointed by METI Japan conducted a verification and want to see whether our calculation is okay. And then the result is quite similar. We could see here that the incremental gas production, only the methane is about 24 billion standard cubic feet. So it's not so far away from our estimation before. So that's why currently we are working together with Janus, the consultant elected by METI, and also with Pertamina in order to finalize the pre-FEED study, and it should be reported to all sponsors in February 2022. And then if we take a look to the other opportunity to use CO2 from other sources, so we could see something like this. So GUNDIH field, actually the potential for storing the CO2 is about 3 million ton. For the Tangguh field, within 10 years is 32 million ton. And then we have also the other CO2 sources in the Eastern Java oil fields. So totally it will be 35 million ton of CO2. And then if we make use also some other low-hanging fruit project from Central Sulawesi, ammonia plant in Central Sulawesi, and also in East Kalimantan. Yeah, so altogether, we could manage about 117 million ton of CO2, which is about 29% from greenhouse gas emission reduction target from energy sector. Remember that our target is about 400 million ton of CO2 should be reduced. So if we expand our effort to the other field, for example, to use the CO2 from coal-fired power plants, so we believe that CO2 that will be stored will be much more. So that's why CCUS is quite popular right now in Indonesia. And then what should we prepare for promoting the CCUS activities? So we develop a CO2 sourcing hub, yeah, for all around Indonesia. So despite we use conventional one-by-one CCUS, we would like to introduce hub clustering CO2 management. So the infrastructure that will be built will be used for several projects. Not only could be used for oil CO2 producer, but also for the CO2 sink provider. And then we implement this system, for example, in South Sumatra. So we could identify several CO2 sources from oil and gas in South Sumatra, as denoted as red here. And then there is also CO2 source from industry here. And there are also several CO2 sources from power plant depicted as blue here. And then the infrastructure are drawn here as blue and yellow lines here. So we could imagine that CCUS could be possible to be implemented here in this area. Another example in East Kalimantan, yeah, several CO2 sources could be identified, as well the CO2 sink, which are indicated as green dots here. Yeah, and currently we engage already a cooperation with PT Kaltim Parna Industry for managing a CO2 from ammonia plant with a volume of 2,000 ton per day. And then the other cooperation is with PT Panca Amara Utama, Jokmek, Mitsubishi, and Mitsubishi Corporation in order to manage CO2 released from Banggai ammonia plant in Central Sulawesi. And we already identify several potential sink, which is Noro, Tiaka, Donggi, and Matindok field. Yeah, okay. And then another new studies that has been conducted is how to manage CO2 from coal to the MA project. So in South Sumatra, coal producer called PT Bukit Asam Tanjung Enim will have a cooperation with Air Product to produce dimethyl ether. But unfortunately, the CO2 amount is 6.6 million ton per year, and we have to try to identify several sink potential. Yeah, so the methodology could be seen here, and several sink could be seen here, 17 field. And then the current status of CCUS regulation is as follows. Basically, we are developing a ministerial regulation for promoting CCUS, and the appointed letter is given is provided by the Director General of Oil and Gas in August, and currently the regulation should cover all the aspects, not only CO2 capture, but also some other, including also monetization and so on. And the other important aspect that should be included in the regulation is how to modify the existing PSC contract. Yeah. So basically, gross revenue could be included also carbon credit, and the cost recovery could include it also the capex for CCUS. Yeah. And then if someone want to use a gross split fiscal scheme, so basically the gross revenue could include also the incentive for implementing CCS and CCUS as indicated here as number 13. So as a conclusion, CCUS implementation in Indonesia is quite unique because it makes environmental in the vicinity cleaner. And secondly, there is an opportunity for receiving additional income from incremental hydrocarbon production, as well also economic benefit from selling carbon credit. And currently, regulation that promotes CCUS activities in Indonesia is urgently needed in order to protect all stakeholders. I would like to introduce also that British Petroleum already got approval for plan of development related to the CCUS in Tangguh field. And that's all my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me invite next speaker. He's Dr. Adam Usadi. He's working as in Energy Center Advisor of ExxonMobil R&D. Adam, floor is yours. Yeah, we can see your presentation file.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about a recently completed study on regional CO2 sequestration options in Southeast Asia. I'm based in Singapore. I'm a computational physicist with ExxonMobil R&D, and I'm working with colleagues from ExxonMobil as well as researchers at the Singapore Energy Center, which was founded jointly by the Nanyang Technological University, NTU, and the National University of Singapore, NUS, and was recently expanded to include A-STAR, which are Singapore's national labs. And I'm working with these colleagues on a portfolio of R&D primarily focused on decarbonization and sustainability technologies and energy systems analyses. ExxonMobil joined the Singapore Energy Center as a founding member almost exactly 3 years ago. So let me start by repeating something I think almost every speaker has said, which is that CCS will likely contribute significantly to decarbonization pathways, in this case for Singapore and other ASEAN member states. Without CCS, we believe that net zero 2050 or beyond is much harder and will be much more expensive. So the research project I'm going to describe, which was done under the auspices of the Singapore Energy Center, was a collaboration between 3 teams at NUS, ExxonMobil, and advisors from the Global CCS Institute, as well as an external advisory committee. Actually, I'm pleased to see several colleagues and committee members presenting today. The study objective was to develop an understanding of the CCS potential in the region focused on 3 principal areas: geological storage in depleted oil and gas fields and saline formations, transportation via pipeline and ship, and policy analysis to understand policies and regulations applicable to CCS for several of the member states of ASEAN. This was a high-level, relatively coarse resolution assessment based on publicly available information. The project sought to establish a seriatim of storage opportunities to increase regional knowledge and understanding. And today I'll mostly cover the geological storage potential. I'll just touch on the transport aspects at the very end, and I really won't cover the policy. We're in the process of submitting a paper for publication, which will detail all three thrusts, and I hope that will be available soon. So we focus on depleted oil and gas fields, their associated field scale saline formations, and the basin scale saline formations. Oil and gas field production has been going on for decades, and there is quite a bit of data available. We started with a comprehensive set of data available primarily from CNC reservoir reports, Wood Mackenzie database, and published literature. And we compiled a list of nearly 2,800 fields. And we then sought to select fields that might be viable or particularly amenable to CO2 storage. That means it was either onshore or, if offshore, fields that were in water depths shallower than maybe 150 meters to minimize the costs. Fields which have already been developed or are on stream now or ceased production. Ideally, the pressure and temperature conditions of the targeted reservoirs would support supercritical dense phase CO2 injection. In other words, they're not low pressure. This would basically mean anything greater than about 1 kilometer. And we focused on large fields which could support multiple years of injection. Now, using these criteria, we reduced the number of fields to about 230 high quality fields. We then applied a methodology developed by the USGS, the US Geological Survey, to calculate the amount of CO2 that can be stored through replacing the produced hydrocarbon pore volume with CO2. We also determined additional storage capacity in the connected saline formations associated with these depleted oil and gas fields using a DOE or a US Department of Energy methodology. And then we calculated the basin scale saline formation storage capacity that provides significant potential because the sedimentary basin is much larger than the oil and gas fields. For the field scale, we also estimated the injection rate using peak production data and the corresponding cost, since a higher injection rate means fewer wells and lower costs. We, when we applied this methodology, this is what we found. So looking at the bar charts on the right, for each field, we had estimated 2 variants of the hydrocarbon replacement approach. The conservative estimate, or blue, reflects CO2 replacement of the produced volume of hydrocarbons, which is a fraction of the available pore volume. The optimistic, or orange, reflects a higher efficiency of production akin to an original oil in place. And then the country by country estimates follows closely the oil and gas production from those countries. So Indonesia and Malaysia alone account for 65% of the total available capacity. Though it is worth pointing out that the top 10 list of largest capacity fields includes those in Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar. And similarly, the field scale saline formations represent an estimate based on the US DOE method of additional pore volume accessible for injection. It incorporates estimates of field volume inferred from the aquifer drive to know how well connected it is, and the efficiency factors based on reservoir properties. So the numbers shown here are really the conservative estimates, nearly 40 gigatons at the field scale and about 275 gigatons at the basin scale. Now, if you put that on a map, and this is a map of Southeast Asia region, it's very colorful and rather busy looking, I appreciate that. The jigsaw puzzle pieces, the colorful ones, are basically the basin scale capacity depicted by color, where deep purple is 90 gigatons. The bubbles inside represent the capacity at the field scale, where each bubble has a color inside. I don't know how well you can see that, but the brown part of the pie inside the small bubbles is oil and gas field. What percent of the field scale capacity is oil and gas fields? And then the green represents the saline formation. I will say that the data was a bit biased towards oil and gas field data. We didn't have saline formation numbers for every single field. That's more of a data deficiency rather than a reflection, a true reflection. So we think there's even potentially more capacity. The bubble size indicates capacity, where the biggest bubbles is about 250 million tons of CO2. And inside each bubble, to add even more data to this chart, you may be able to see some crosshairs, vertical and horizontal lines. The horizontal line indicates injection rate for a single well, where the best ones exceed 1 million tons per annum. The vertical lines indicate cost to inject 2 million tons per annum of CO2. So lower injectivity means more wells are required, and that's more expensive. So an ideal field on this chart would actually have a wide horizontal line, meaning it's very productive injectors, and a very short vertical line, meaning it's lower cost. We evaluated a hub model for export of CO2 from Singapore to regional sequestration sites. In this case, we considered onshore and offshore pipeline options as well as shipping options. On the right side, we depicted two shipping transport concepts that we included in our relatively high-level evaluation. And we developed a cost model to estimate transport and storage costs as a function of distance and annual capacity. We looked at 1 MTA, 2 MTA, and 5 MTA versions. And I do want to note that we really only looked or considered new capital infrastructure only. In other words, we did not consider infrastructure reuse or anything like that. We really just wanted to get a bound on the expense of transport and storage. So the cost model did assume that we had relatively pure CO2 available from a CO2 capture hub in Singapore, which we hope will be developed in the coming years. And the transport costs include for shipping, dehydration and liquefaction, loading, the shipping cost itself, unloading, injection, and long-term monitoring. And similarly for pipeline, it's not shown here in a picture, but the transport costs included dehydration and compression, pipeline, injection, and monitoring. On the left side is a map showing several options for pipeline and shipping export from Singapore. If the distances are short, they can be cost effectively handled through pipelines, for example, shown here, pipelines to Malaysia and Indonesia via solid lines. For the longer distances, shipping options depicted with dashed lines may be used here, for example, from Singapore to Brunei or Singapore to Vietnam. Unit costs for transport and storage of CO2 from Singapore were calculated, and they ranged from about $50 to $450 per ton, quite a big range. The details will be in the forthcoming publication that I mentioned earlier. Because, as I mentioned, we're not putting in any infrastructure reuse, we also didn't have any optimization embedded in there as well. So these, we feel, are potentially conservative high-end cost estimates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aram. Then we'd like to invite next speaker, Dr. Tony Zhang. He's working for Senior Client Executive Lead, Global CCS Institute. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I can hear. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Please face the slide.
No.
No. Okay, share my slide. I see the screen now.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry about the trouble. I have just a couple of minutes. I just jump to my presentation. First, I do want to mention the Global CCS Institute. I know many of you know the institute well, and I think some of my colleagues may have introduced the institute already, but just very briefly. So we are an international member-based organization and not for profit, and so we are headquartered in Australia, and we have office around the world. And so our job basically at the institute is to accelerate the deployment and of CCS around the world. So the second slide here is about our, I think we are very proud of the number of members we have. So we have, I believe, around 110 members around the world as of today. Some latest member may not be listed here. And I would just want to use this slide to demonstrate that there are so many corporations, governments around the world have been supporting the institute, but that demonstrates the strong momentum and of CCS deployment around the world. So the next slide here, I believe you would have seen this and in some early presentations about the growth, the rapid growth in terms of CCS project pipelines. Here I just want to point out one thing. As you can see, from 2010 to 2021, we have gone through high time and low times, and it's spread around 2015, 2016. And so that's where projects, number of projects were low, and so interest momentum were down. But I think after the Paris Agreement, and I think after basically spread 2018, we see rapid increase. And in 2020, despite the pandemic, lots of new facilities have been added to our database. But of course, if you look at the last column here, of course, we want to see more red projects, red colored, which means project moving to operating phase. I'm confident that will happen in coming years. So now back to Asia Pacific. So this year, we are very proud, very delighted to see a few new facilities added to the database, and especially in Southeast Asia. So we have 2 projects added in Indonesia and Malaysia, and the Repsol Sakakamang project and Petronas Kasawari project. So these are the first ones in Southeast Asia. I think that's a great, great achievement. And so also, of course, different countries have made different policy incentives, either long-term or short-term. China launched its ETS system, and CCS included its 5-year plan. And of course, Australia, quite some positive momentum, quite some policy progress as well. And we know that currently the $250 million funding is open for application. I think it's closing early next month. And also the methodology has been developed and endorsed by the energy minister. Because now if you do CCS project in Australia, you can earn carbon credits. I think today's spot price is about $30 a ton, Australian dollars a ton. And of course, Japan has been a critical partner in the Asia Pacific regions, while different clean energy programs such as the blue hydrogen opportunities and really driving transnational cooperation in CCS. So that's the bigger picture there. And now today my presentation more focus on the Southeast Asia. It's very about the Southeast Asia Roundtable. And as we know, Southeast Asia has been a really emerging hotspot for CCUS in the Asia Pacific region. We have heard from Dr. Soleh, heard from Dr. Adam Musadi as well, talk about development and potential in this part of the world. And because this region does have a unique energy and industry system, and I think CCS is particularly important to decarbonize different sectors in this region. And now there are several projects to make it FID or at a very advanced development stage. And of course, we have also heard from Dr. Soleh And so there are regulation and policy developments in several countries, especially in Indonesia and Malaysia. We have noticed lots of international collaborations, and Japan has been supporting lots of collaborations in this region. We have heard from earlier speakers, and so the other point I want to mention that is basically a regional approach or collaboration is probably critical or very important to optimize the CCS network in this region. So basically that is the feature of CCS development in Southeast Asia. Now I want to talk about the roundtable. So some of you may have attended, some may have not. So this was established started last year. We had the first meeting on 16th of June of 2020. And so the objective of that platform is to basically to bring together key stakeholders and to public and private to provide updates and to discuss common policy and legal issues and to coordinate stakeholder engagement and to identify our support and basically collaboration. And so that's the purpose of that platform. So far, we have had 6 meetings, and our next one will be next month, November. And so we have lots of great discussion. The topics covered different areas, and so such as capacity development, CCS hub and cluster development, regulation, carbon pricing, marine transportation of CO2. So basically now, in terms of collaborations, we have, based on the previous discussions, now we are facilitating design some collaboration programs. This topic may include CO2 shipping, business model, and legal reg framework. We are bringing together regulators in this region to discuss regulations. And of course, want to promote some of the regional framework and for bilateral and multilateral transport and storage CO2. And the last one here is more about the carbon credit, where the CCS can enjoy carbon credits, and also that credit can be transferred from one country to another. So that's from a very brief update. And as a representative from the Southeast Asia CCS Roundtable, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so now we'd like to invite all the speakers for Q&A session. We already received a lot of questions. Okay, first question is to Christian. How many injection wells do you assume to achieve 10 megaton per annum CO2 injection?
Yes, thank you for the question. As I said, we've got a pretty good understanding of the injectivity of the reservoir, and there were 4 injection wells in the historic operation of the field that were injecting at peak, as I said, 1 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas recycle. So we've been able to model the injection on the field through those 4 wells, and we expect that 3 to 4 wells should be more than sufficient. But we also have, I guess, looking at it, the project will be pipeline constrained from the ability of the, or the capacity of the pipeline rather, and we expect that the reservoir has more than enough injectivity for a much larger project if possible.
Thank you for your answer. Our next question is to Christian. Does Bayu-Undan CCS available for CO2 import from other area in Asia?
Look, I guess our foundation project is really around dealing with the emissions that come into Darwin Hub. That said, the project is ideally situated for receiving emissions from other sources, and so ultimately there may be potential for that to happen.
Thank you for your answer. And okay, it's a kind of detailed Telton, I understand ExxonMobil team developed a database for CO2 storage capacity a few years ago, in which studies the lower estimate was set to 1/7 of the upper estimate. On which capacity estimate is your current study based?
I was actually starting to answer that online. This study did start that study. This study, as I mentioned, is based in methodologies on the US and DOE methods, where I think if I understand the question, wondering is the saline formation open and has more space or closed, and field by field, we looked for whether or not, for example, there was aquifer support to make the determination for a specific field. And the estimates, the conservative and optimistic range, kind of reflected uncertainty of basically geological properties and other things like that.
Thank you very much. I have a question for whole panel. Have anyone considered injecting in saline aquifers? Apart from Northern Lights, all presentations have been focused on depleted oil and gas fields. Christian, can you start?
Diego, thank you very much for the question. I guess up until sort of recent years, the focus of the industry has been around aquifer injection, but I think the significant opportunity that's presented from the data that's available from depleted fields provides more impetus in that space. It's reducing the uncertainty bandwidths on these projects. So for us, we're starting with depleted reservoirs, which we have a lot of information and data on, but we also acknowledge that within the same stratigraphic columns, there's also saline aquifer intervals that may enhance the ultimate capacity of the project. But we're focusing on what we have a lot of data and knowledge on to begin with.
How about you, Adam? No, Dr. Su?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Basically, in Indonesia, our focus is with the low-hanging fruit CCUS project. So it means that since we have a lot of depleted oil field, so and the data is quite good, and then this will be the first priority. Of course, injecting CO2 the saline aquifer is the other option, but I believe that the first option is to inject to the depleted oil reservoir.
Thank you. Adam, how about you?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What is the question to me?
So, how do you think about injecting CO2 into saline aquifer?
Right. This was a study, as a hypothetical. Obviously, the aquifer has significant capacity. So I don't have project experience that I can actually expand upon. I will say, though, this study did identify a lot of capacity in depleted oil and gas fields, which, as some of the previous speakers have commented, there are issues associated with depleted oil and gas fields where they have existing wells that could become sources, so on. And all of those issues must be considered before you make a decision on where you want CCS.
Thank you. Tony, do you have any idea?
Thanks. So I echo the message from other panelists, and injecting into oil gas fields and maybe more effective. But of course, there are other projects currently injecting into the aquifer, and such as Chevron Golden project. So that's injecting about 4 million tons CO2 into the aquifer. And then the other project, also in Australia, is the Victorian Carbonate project. It's at early stage, but there's also targeting sea and aquifer as well. That's offshore.
Thank you very much. Okay, here is a question again to Christian. How many years do you estimate the CCS well? No, it's for acorn. Oh, as to the Bayu-Undan CCS project, what is the benefit or merit for the East Timor government?
Thanks for the question. I guess the project is in development stages, and we're looking forward to working with the Timorese government and the regulator ANPM over the coming years on the regulatory regime that supports the project and the commercial arrangements. So that's something that we'll be looking forward to working through with them over the coming months.
Thank you very much. We have the time restriction, so thank you very much for your answering to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I'm supposed to make a wrap-up, but we are a bit behind in time, so I'd like to make it short as possible. So today, we have learned a lot from the lessons already existing in the world, in Europe and in Asia and Pacific region. And we have a long way to go, so sharing knowledge and sharing information is very helpful for us to deploy the CCS projects and CCS information to the world. And I'd like to thank you to all the speakers today for your kind assistance and cooperation. That is my wrap-up.
Okay, thank you very much for all speakers and Dr. Nakayama for your huge contribution to make the part 2 very insightful and informative. Thank you very much. I believe we have learned a lot from all the experience through the existing project. Okay, we have received many questions, but I'm sorry, most of the questions we could not answer due to time constraint. And some presentation material have been uploaded to our website, but some of them has not been allowed to upload. So I'm sorry for that too. And okay, and thank you very much to all the participant audience today for such a long time. I really appreciate from the organizer. And thank you, huge contribution interpreters for the great simultaneous interpretation today. I appreciate. Thank you very much. We are running time, almost running time, and toward the end of the today's forum, I would like to introduce Mr. Toshiaki Nakajima, President of Japan CCS Company Limited, co-organizer together with us today's forum. At the end of the forum today, I would like to ask Mr. Nakajima to deliver closing remarks. Mr. Nakajima, please.
Thank you, Nambu-san, for introduction. This is my honor to speak here today. I'm Toshiaki Nakajima with Japan CCS. Being a president for about 1.5 years, so I myself is still newcomer to CCS community. Well, first of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for those in Japan, Asia, and worldwide attending the Japan-Asia CCUS Forum 2021. I would like to thank the speakers for their valuable presentations. This is the second time Japan CCS has organized this forum together with the Global CCS Institute. I wish to express our appreciation for this opportunity, and I would also like to take this occasion to extend my sincere congratulations to Mr. Jalad Daniels, who has been newly appointed CEO. I guess he's now sleeping in midnight, Washington, D.C. Anyway, at this forum, in part one, there were presentations on the progress of CCS development in Japan and expansion of the network with the countries of Asia. In part two, we are able to share the status and challenges of projects being advanced in Europe and Asia Pacific. Through this forum, we acknowledged once again that in order to achieve the social implementation of CCUS, capture, transportation, utilization, and storage must function as an integrated system. And furthermore, that CCUS must be incorporated into the total system that connect the suppliers and consumers of fossil energy resources, which will continue to play a major role in the future energy mix. To this end, in addition to further R&D, addressing both post and pre-combustion, including negative emission, a framework activating system from an economic or financial perspective is absolutely necessary. As for the opening remarks by Mr. Sadamitsu and keynote speech by Mr. Soda, both from METI, I understand the Japanese government will formulate a long-term roadmap for CCUS and accelerate its efforts. In this regard, Japan CCS will continue communicating the new initiatives at Tomakomai to the world and work together to solve the various issues. Lastly, we would like to express our sincere appreciation to METI and NEDO for their guidance and cooperation. In closing, it is our sincere hope that next year we will be able to bring together further result and achievement to this forum, and that many of you will be able to attend again. Thank you very much and for your participation today. See you again. どうもありがとうございました。